The gentleman here who said one or two people. The gentleman here said, why are you threatened by one or two people? I'm not threatened by one or two people. Nobody is threatened by one or two people. The figures I gave you showed we're not talking about one or two people. The figure I gave you at the very beginning was that people who identify as white British citizens are now a minority in their capital cities. So we're not talking about one or two people, and it is very disingenuous to pretend that I was. Thirdly, the lady at the back, you say colonialism. I'd like to return the question to you. I don't deny the crimes of colonialism, not for a moment. I'd like to ask you a question. How long do former colonial countries have to be punished for then? How long do we have to have our identity erased for? Is there any end limit to it in your eyes, or is it only at the point of complete negation? And finally, why is it that it's only European former colonialist countries? One of the largest and most significant and longest colonial powers in history was the Turkish Empire. Do we do this to Turkey? Do we say to Turkey, you must have your identity erased as well as punishment for the past? Almost every single people in the world at some point has done something historically they could be punished for. But why, I wonder, is it that it is Europeans that we are always being heard, being offered that choice?
And it is true. Turkey, which was known as the center of the Ottoman Empire, used to be one of the largest colonial forces in the world. Yet, not one leftist ever speaks of seriously bringing the Turks to heel and having them apologize for the crimes of being Turkish. Just last week, a British man met his end while holidaying in the country. 20-year-old Brit, Tyler Carey, was discovered dead in a hotel in Turkey, and his family was aghast. Was he found on his bed, hopelessly overdosed after having a nice time with escorts? Did he jump from the balcony while having drug-induced hallucinations? Or was he murdered by drug-dealing enrichers of culture? No, he wasn't. Instead, Tyler died in a lift shaft. The police are unclear about what exactly happened and how this occurred, but one thing we can be sure of is that this injury was caused by malfunctioning infrastructure that was probably badly maintained. TUI, the holiday company in charge of the trip, has said it will continue to support Carey's family. But will the company stop making use of bad and incompetently ran hotels in the second world? Will it stop advertising these holidays to gullible first worlders who, according to our cultural zeitgeist, have white privilege? Your guess is as good as mine. Here is what Douglas Murrayy thinks of white privilege specifically.
I find it strange that we've been getting lectured about privilege from a prince and a princess.
Oh, I think it's beautiful. I mean, sometimes things just write themselves, don't they? Yes, the privilege game. I'm not into the privilege game, by the way, because I think it's irreducible. I think you can't ever finish the game. And can I explain why for a second? Because,
please.
Because first of all, it shifts all the time in our lives. I mean, you may say, for instance, some people would, that if you are rich, that you have privilege. Well, you do actually. I mean, you have a form of privilege. You have certain advantages over people who are poor, certainly over the very poor.
The truth is that these holidaying opportunities are actually a good example of white privilege. It is the gullibility of white privilege that seduces companies into creating these holidaying opportunities while knowing that first worlders, who are overwhelmingly white, will jump at the opportunity to have some niche privileged experience that, in actual fact, may not be all that good for them. Here's what Douglas Murrayy thinks of the term white privilege.
So what would you say to someone who said, because you acknowledge that perhaps we painted history in a jingoistic way previously and we're working towards making it more honest, an honest representation of history. But what would you say to someone who would say, well, this is the moment when kind of ethnic minority people, women, LGBT people are now getting their fair hearing, and that this is just people that are very uncomfortable with having that increased representation, reacting against that?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, I do think a lot of people who make those claims need to know more. I'm getting rather fed up of people who've only just discovered things. presenting it as if everybody else is as ignorant as them. Like, some of us happen to know a lot of female writers before the year 2020. Some of us can think of an awful lot of very talented and brilliant black figures.
The truth couldn't be any clearer. History was a mess for everyone. And for a majority of our time on Earth, humans dying in preventable tragedies was the norm, not the exception. It didn't matter if you were black, or white, or gay, or straight, or man or woman, you suffered the same. Even wealthy people in the past suffered much more than the working class today. What wouldn't an ancient king give for a short of penicillin 500 years ago? Or indoor plumbing? There are spices at local shops today that would give the average medieval knight a brain hemorrhage. We live in a much better time than all our ancestors combined, and for some reason this much better time is when we have decided to swallow suicidal ideological lies that paint our privileges as immoral. That is just not true.
Brilliant black figures from before today. Some of us happen to know that there have been very prominent gay figures who existed before 2020. And I'm sort of startled at how much people give themselves away when they present it as if this is all new. Now, is it true that certain figures and certain voices were not heard as much in the past? Sure, but you can play that game almost irreducibly. And by the way, another thing worth pointing out in that is there are a lot of lines we don't play that a lot now. For instance, you can very easily say that the history of literature and politics has to a considerable degree underrepresented the working class. You can say that in almost every country. Let's go a little further down that road. You can certainly say that people who are illiterate have been not well.
Well, do leftists even want to solve it? It doesn't seem like they do. Every liberal win in the Western world has been met with even more agitation. Marriage equality hasn't led to peace and quiet from the LGBTQ community. Instead, it has led to even more demands. 20 years ago, you were required to merely be happy for your gay neighbor who is getting married. Now, you must make sure he is accessible to your kids and must refer to him in whatever princely manner he requires just because has on a bit of makeup. It is the same in academia. Instead of now incorporating historically marginalized voices in literature or the arts or elsewhere, they are now celebrated differently as different from the mainstream, which basically defeats the whole purpose.
Not well represented throughout history, or people born to the worst imaginable circumstances, irrespective of any other issue, have been poorly represented in literature, government, and so on. There are lots of ways in which we could do this. Now, the way in which we've decided to focus on it, for all sorts of reasons at the moment, is let's focus on it on gender, race, and sexuality. But, I mean, history was a mess for almost everyone. You know, it's one of the reasons why I revolt at the impression given that, for instance, white privilege existed throughout the past and it was something that excluded black. Most people in this country did not have an easy 14th century or 15th century or any other century up to the present. You know, you only have to go 2 generations back to people.
And this is done under the sweet-sounding label of equity. Our progressives overlords love that, don't they? The goal is no longer equality because if we're there, wouldn't be able to allow works and people to be judged on their own merit. So, the goal is now equity. People are not hoping to be equal any longer. They are now hoping to have equity. But even that is a false dream, as Douglas Murrayy argued.
The issue of meritocracy in America and the wider West at the moment is a fascinating issue because we're totally torn on it. Let me attempt to sort of mend part of that tear in the following phrase. You all know the idea of straw manning. If you don't know the idea of straw manning, you should see my recent debate with Malcolm Gladwell in Canada, where he gave a superb masterclass in what it is to straw man an opponent's argument. I want to do the opposite of that on the issue of meritocracy and steel man the argument. What is the argument that we could actually agree on as the issue in meritocracy in a society like ours in America? And I would say that it's something like this, that nobody should be held back.
And that is it, folks. Problem solved. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash the like and subscribe buttons. See you on the next one.